do an introduction. Megan will be doing an introduction and overview. NICET is hosting excellent webinars and have one-on-one counseling opportunities for PSC CUNY union members. Carolina Rodriguez is from EdCap, Community Service Society. She will be helping us a lot on QA. She's a financial counselor expert in this area, invaluable resource for us. And James Davis is going to give us the introduction to how we got here through union struggle. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the AFT and the PSC.
Thank you, Paul, and welcome everybody. Thanks for making time to be here tonight. I'm James Davis. I'm a faculty member at Brooklyn College, and I'm the president of the Professional Staff Congress. And we are really thrilled to be able to host several webinars about public service loan forgiveness. This is the second one in the series. The first was for full-time employees, and I'm really excited we're able to continue to do more. And we'll speak a little bit about the expansion to adjunct faculty as well. I really want to thank Paul, who just kicked us off, because Paul's an adjunct faculty member at John Jay College. He's been teaching all day. He's turned over a substantial portion of his life in order to be able to support the work that the PSC is doing to educate our members and promote the PSLF program. So Paul, thank you so much. And I also really want to thank Carolina from EdCap and Megan from NICET, New York State United Teachers. They're the experts here. I wanted to say hello and to frame a little bit about what you're going to hear, which is really practical, important, concrete advice about how to proceed. And I just wanted to say that politically, to reach this point is very significant with the PSLF expansion, because many of you may know this, but public service loan forgiveness, the program existed in a technical, narrow sense under the Trump administration, but Betsy DeVos and company were managing it into the ground so that 2% of eligible borrowers were having their loans forgiven. And it took a lot of struggle, and it took actually a lawsuit from the American Federation of Teachers president, Randy Weingarten, and others as plaintiffs on a suit to begin to reverse that kind of stranglehold that the DeVos and the Trump administration had placed around PSLF. And what emerged, and you'll hear more about this, is, some of you already know about this already, the kind of the Biden, quote unquote, Biden waiver to try to rectify the bottlenecks that had been put in place and to ease the eligibility restrictions so that folks could consolidate loans and apply by October 31st, 2022. So currently the Biden waiver has a sunset of the end of October, which is right around the corner, which is why it's so urgent that we're trying to get as much information to eligible borrowers as possible. So you get some of that information tonight. And I want to add that in New York State, we're really fortunate because largely through pressure from New York State United Teachers, Professional Staff Congress, and others, a bill that was put forward by Harvey Epstein in the Assembly and Kevin Thomas in the Senate was passed in this last legislative session, and the governor is poised to sign it. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight, which is the expansion of public service loan forgiveness at the federal level in New York State to include part-time faculty who have the equivalent of full-time employment. And that's really the construct that the Epstein and Thomas bill put forward, because we know that adjunct faculty actually work more than their teaching contact hours. And the question is the threshold eligibility for the equivalent of full-time. So we'll hear a little bit about that tonight from Megan and Carolina. And I'm excited because we lobbied really, really hard to get both chambers of the legislature on board. The PSC put in a lot of time and energy into getting these bills, getting those bills approved, and now the governor is going to sign on Thursday. So this week, Thursday morning, she is scheduled to sign the bill. So I'm excited for that to happen, and really glad that so many of you were able to be here this evening to hear from our experts, Megan and Carolina. So let me turn the floor over to them. And again, welcome, and thanks so much for joining tonight.
So Megan, go ahead. Megan is from
Okay.
NYSET Benefits, and she leads off the NYSET webinars, and I'll let her take it from here.
Good evening, Paul, thank you. And it's great to be joining everyone, particularly a group that's primarily adjunct faculty. As Paul mentioned, my name is Megan O'Brien. And if I seem a tad distracted at this moment, it's because I'm really trying to share my screen appropriately to get a PowerPoint up there. So James, you're still on. Could you give me a thumbs up if there's a PowerPoint showing? That sounds like a no. Let's try. We got it?
No, it is. It's working, Megan.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So as I mentioned, my name is Megan O'Brien. I'm NYSET's organizing manager. I've been facilitating NYSET's student debt assistance for our members for about almost 2 years now. And we've covered a lot of ground in this program. And one of the two most exciting things that really come about in recent memory here, since the public service loan forgiveness program was so ineffective for so long, was the successful lawsuit, as James mentioned, and the Biden administration's waiver of some of the previous PSLF limitations. And actually, the third thing that's exciting, assuming Governor Hochul is doing the right thing on Thursday and signing the bill that actually credits adjuncts with an appropriate amount of time for the work they do in class. So with those three things, this is really a sea change for folks who would not have qualified for public service loan forgiveness before. So I'm just going to roll into my presentation here real quick. So again, NYSET and LPSC members are also members of NYSET as their state affiliate. We offer a series of resources to assist our members with loan forgiveness and just dealing with student loan debt in general. And I'll be happy to show those resources to you just as soon as I can get to my laptop to do the right thing. Here we go. Okay, must be a Monday. So I want to cover just a few things before I dive into kind of what the program entails. One of I guess the more depressing things that I've seen in the past couple of years in working with members of this program is there can be a lot of shame associated around student debt. And, you know, I would just say this. I know myself, my husband, I'm sure everyone on this webinar tonight, we had to take out the loans we did in order to have the professions we do and the credentials and the certification and the degrees we have. There was no other way to do it. And it's not always an easy thing. And people come to, you know, this work from very different paths. I use the example of my husband sometimes. He's an attorney. He decided he wanted to go to law school at 35. Before that, he was a graphic designer. Massive midlife career change. And it was not cheap, but he did it. And we paid the loans, and he is a much happier person for that career shift. But was it a good investment? Yes. And I'm going to assume it was a good investment for everyone on this webinar tonight. But that doesn't mean, particularly, I think, for folks who maybe are not first generation college, but first generation, you know, to grad school or academia, you know, there can be, you know, some shame and some pushback from our families about why we made these choices and took on this debt. So I just want to kind of put that out there. I don't think you should feel shame. We have a higher education system in this country that for most people can cost a tremendous amount of money, and you have to jump through a lot of hoops. And in addition, you know, some of the loan servicers who have been dealing with your student loans now for decades in some cases, their business practice has been remarkably shady. They don't earn really any money if your student loan account is current and in good standing. However, if they can pull you out of default, they earn about $3,000. So there's not really an incentive to provide good information, correct information, or frankly, timely information. And as James mentioned, it's gotten so bad that there were multiple lawsuits in recent years, including loan servicer practices and including the conduct of our Department of Education under the previous administration. And one of the more important lawsuits that took place was again brought by our national affiliate, American Federation of Teachers. and that was Weingarten v. DeVos. And that settlement came about this past October, and it really changed significantly what folks can do regarding public service loan forgiveness. One of the first things it did was provided reconsideration for people who've already been denied. So I want to put that out there. Oftentimes we get folks in the program who may have tried for PSLF, a couple years ago, 12 months ago, a few months ago. Try again. If you were rejected, try again. And, again, we can assist you with that process to do it again, because again, the rules have changed substantially. And frankly, folks who would have qualified even under the old rules, some of them got denied just through, frankly, bad loan servicer practices. So again, don't feel defeated if you've already been rejected for this. It expanded the type of loans. People who have FFEL loans now qualify. Again, automatic review of applications for folks who filed prior to November of 2020. And detailed notices for borrowers. This has been very important. The PSLF application has changed. You can now check a box where essentially they're going to inform you of how many payments you have left and what you need to do. So as I said, things have improved rapidly here in the past year or so. I want to touch on something that I also see often that I really want to encourage you to avoid. There are a number of essentially scam assistance agencies out there. They're for-profit groups. You might see them on Instagram, Facebook, social media. You might even get cold calls. I've had folks get cold calls to their school classrooms or offices with these people essentially saying, oh, pay us up front, we'll do the paperwork for you, we guarantee loan forgiveness. They're going to do one of two things. They're going to take your money and do nothing, or they're going to take your money and file your paperwork. And that paperwork can be filed for free with a little bit of assistance. So again, please be cautious of who you're working with. So on that, I want to talk about, well, first of all, I want to say that Carolina, who's going to present after me, does phenomenal work with a not-for-profit in New York City, and she is beyond reputable. So I would definitely put her in the camp of reputable agencies to work with if you need that assistance. But the benefits that you get as a NYSET member, as a PSC member, is that we work with a company known as Cambridge Credit Counseling, and they are not-for-profit based out of Massachusetts. They also work with MTA, which is a union who represents higher education faculty in the Massachusetts state system. They do work with vulnerable populations, credit counseling for incarcerated individuals, poverty programs. They really take on the student debt work and the counseling as an extension of their economic justice work, and it's been really a privilege to work with them for the past couple of years. So we offer with Cambridge a couple options. Webinars that are about an hour and a half long that go through the process, everything from consolidation of loans to going to public service loan forgiveness, if that's the best option for you. For folks in our K through 12 universe, there's also teacher loan forgiveness. We discussed that. Following up with that, you also are able to access a free one-to-one counseling session with trained student debt counselors who can walk you through the process, answer detailed questions, and go from there. And finally, we have access to a student loan portal, which is an online tool that you can plug in for information, figure out a plan, see what loans you have and have all the information there. And you can use that portal in one of two ways. Many folks find that that's all they need is the online portal, and they can just go, okay, I've got my answers, I'm going to go forth and file my paperwork. You can also use the portal information and access a free counseling session. Sometimes it can just be helpful for you and the counselor to look at your information all in the same place. So really 3 different tools that may be of help for you. And again, this is who presents our webinars and does a number of much of the counseling work. Marty Lynch, she's the president of Financial Counseling Association of America, Director of Education, and Todd Freehaber, who's the Student Loan Counseling Manager at Cambridge. And these gentlemen do sit on the national committees and do the work at the federal level with this stuff. They've put out information to our members before we even got the formal announcement from the Department of Education. So I can't speak highly enough to the work that they do. So I want to also let you know of the webinar schedule we have coming up. This Thursday's, I have to tell you, is already closed out. We cap registration at 500 people. We're already there, but we do have 4 more sessions scheduled: September 22nd, September 28th, October 6th, and October 13th. Again, I know many of the folks on tonight are adjunct faculty, and we're coming down to the wire here. So I would say do try and sign up for a webinar, but I will also put in the link to simply do a direct counseling session and access the portal also. So here you'll see the student loan portal, studentloans.nicet.org/workshop portal. And I will put these links in the chat for you also. This is where you can schedule an appointment. Again, studentloans.nicet.org/appointment. And in order to schedule your appointment, you are going to need your NICET ID number. And because I believe Mercury is in retrograde and various other reasons, right now, our PSA members, when they go to the NICET website, they're not having an easy time looking up their NICET number. I'm going to drop my personal email in the chat and in the Q&A. Feel free to email me directly. I will respond with your NICET member ID number within 24 hours. I would far prefer that people don't get hung up looking for an ID number and that they get to this process as quickly as possible. So again, do feel free to email me directly for that. I'm going to touch a little bit about, you've heard some terms we've thrown around, the waiver and loan, what does this mean? So public service loan forgiveness has actually been around since 2007. It was signed into law under George W. Bush actually signed it into law. And I want to emphasize for folks who are thinking, okay, I don't have 10 years as an adjunct faculty. I haven't worked in education that long. What do I do? Public service loan forgiveness doesn't just apply to public sector employees or public sector or private sector faculty or higher education employees. It applies to anyone who works in a not-for-profit with a few very narrow exceptions. And narrow exceptions essentially include union staff, ironically, and also folks who work for explicitly partisan organizations. So if you work for a right or left-wing think tank or lobbying group, that would be excluded. But if you did work with the Peace Corps, the United Nations, a not-for-profit school, if you work in healthcare and you've done any work with not-for-profit hospitals, of which most of New York's are, really the wide variety of not-for-profit work, that also applies. So take a look at your employment history. If you don't think you're going to get there with your academic background, go back and look. And you need 10 years. It does not have to be continuous employment. So take a look and see if you can pull from previous employers. So on that, again, the waiver opened things up substantially on October 6, 2021. And what it does is for people who had different types of loans that are not necessarily direct federal loans, it said, okay, consolidate your loans, we'll broaden the types of loans, and you won't start from scratch. You're not going to start at one payment, you'll start at how many payments you've already been made, those payments will count. But folks do need to consolidate their loans. If you had a Perkins loan, if you're like me and did your higher education, arguably back in dark ages, back when there were Perkins loans, those now are also qualified for public service loan forgiveness. A question comes up about Parent Plus loans. There is a very, very narrow path to get some Parent Plus loans forgiven. Carolina and myself touched upon it last time. That's something that you would really want to speak individually to a loan counselor to get more details on. But the point being, really much wider types of loans have been opened up for potential public service loan forgiveness. But again, we keep seeing this date and talking about October. So all this needs to be done before October 31st of this year. So Halloween, do not be a pumpkin, do this prior. As James and Paul have mentioned, we are hopefully getting the legislation signed this Thursday, but if you have loans out there that are not consolidated already, or you have loans that are not direct loans, consolidate them. Start the consolidation process now. You can go to studentloan.gov, and again, I'll drop that link in the chat, and start the consolidation process. You can do that before you have to do that before you submit a public service loan application. So you can start that process now. So again, as I just mentioned, we're talking about consolidation. Do start consolidating. we're getting down to the wire on time. So some of the advice that we're putting out to folks is, if you don't have an answer on consolidation, and consolidation now can take 60 days or more, get your public service loan forgiveness form in anyway while you're waiting for consolidation, so you get it in before the deadline. Very quickly, I just want to discuss some other benefits that might be of assistance to you. One is, if you're looking to finish off a degree, if you're trying to finish off a master's, or if you're looking for some tips on everything from classroom management to different education tools, if you are an instructor, you can take a look at NYSET's Education and Learning Trust at elt.nyset.org. And we have a wide variety of courses. And then also I'd encourage folks to take a look at member benefits at nyset.org. And that's everything from, discounted, car and home and renters insurance, to programs that help with affording home heating oil, to discounts on vacations, life insurance. The offerings are very broad. And again, as part of the value of your union membership, you have access to those programs. So do take a look at that, and that might be something that you might find helpful. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And as promised, I'm going to start dropping those links into the chat right now. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Paul. Thank you.
Well, so there was questions about the FEIN that I'm putting in the chat right now. And I'll find a way to put this up on our website as well. And thank you so much, Megan. That was fabulous, that introduction. This is very complicated, as you'll find out when you do the webinars. And with all the questions we have in chat, we may not be able to answer all of them. There's just so many different permutations of people's situations. So that's the case where you may want to look at a recorded webinar from EdCap, or of course sign up for the NYSET webinar. And let me just say one reason I put in the FEINs is we did get a report from somebody in our last full-time webinar that somebody had put in the wrong address a while ago and then had it rejected. So what I put up here is the correct address for each FEIN. Basically at CUNY, we have 2 EIN numbers, one for senior colleges and one for community colleges. So I'm going to pivot to the, I'll try share screen. The actual employment form, which hopefully you see now, to make it a little bigger. And I'm in an adjunct room right now at John Jay College. The last time we did this, I had 2 screens. So it's a little awkward for me here, but the first, so basically what we've been waiting for, us adjuncts, is for this bill to be signed. Because if you fill this out now and send it in to your campus, they would report your contact hours, which we all know has nothing to do with how many hours you actually teach. But with the new law, actually under the existing law, CUNY, it's within their discretion to report somebody that teaches three credit courses of working for a qualifying 30 hours a week, but they don't do that. And the law that was passed by New York State compels basically SUNY and CUNY to multiply the contact hours by 3.35. So to do that, we'll bring somebody over 30 hours that teaches three credit courses. But I saw a question about somebody that's teaching 2 3-credit courses, and that will not come up to full time. But if you are doing other type of public service work that's paid, then that's eligible, then you can combine it with that, with the, your 20 hours. So the first section is fairly straightforward. So to be eligible for the Biden waivers, which expire October 31st, you need to file one of these forms, documentation. Now, it could be that you have other public service. I would say, other than CUNY, do that right now. We aren't going to be able to apply for this to the 15th, and we expect our campuses to be flooded with these. So if you can get any other full-time employment, get that in. So the first part is straightforward. If you haven't met the 10 years yet in public service or the 120 payments, then just check the first box, and then you will be in, you'll have your timestamp if you submit this and it's accepted, and you'll qualify for the Biden waivers. And then what you do is when you, every year, most likely, you'll submit another form until you reach the 10 years and the 120 payments. But if you do qualify, then for sure, check this second box. I'm not as sure about the forbearance, so I'm going to leave Carolina to jump in on that either afterwards or now. Now this box here, I'm going to say something about it now and come back to it again. I've had a conversation with CUNY Central about what do we do if you've applied for this form and you've submitted to your campus HR and it's getting close to October 31st and you haven't heard anything back to them. I asked CUNY Central if in this case, whether we should check this box that says that you haven't been able to get the certification because it's closed or they've refused to certify. Well, it's not exactly refused to certify, but they haven't certified. So as the best information I have now is if you are close to the deadline, you didn't submit it in time to be processed, to click this, and hopefully you'll get time stamped in the Biden waiver period. The response I got from CUNY Central was no comment when I asked for guidance, but they did say, please give your HR campus enough time to process. So you'll have to do it as soon as you can. Now, section 3, notice it says to be completed by borrower or employer. My last conversation with CUNY Central was what they recommended, and they said no comment. But in our conversations that we had, that were more informal, we do think that you'll be able to avoid possible errors by the campus processor if you fill it out yourself. I put in chat the employer, the FEIN and the correct address, and then you can put in the website, the begin date, employment end date, and then for average hours per week, you're going to want to put 30 hours or more. Now, some of us teach at more than one campus. I teach 2 courses at CUNY, so that's 20 hours. And then I also teach at Fordham University. So I'll be filling out separate forms for CUNY and for Fordham. And this way, when I apply at Fordham, I try to communicate with them, not so successfully. I'll fill out this form and I'll put down for 2 courses, 20 hours a week. So that adds up to 40. So employment status, actually, if Carolina can help on that. I don't know what we would check. If I was teaching 3 courses at one school, I would be inclined to click full-time, even though we're part-time adjuncts supposedly. If I'm filing for 2 different jobs, I'd probably do part-time for each. Now at CUNY, we are a governmental organization. We notice also that a college or university is listed here. So you click yes and skip to section 4, which is actually, we don't fill that out. That's employer certification. So you don't have to do any of this. But if you're applying for another non-for-profit type entity, then you would fill out 10 through 14. Or you would leave it to your employer to do so. So this isn't terribly complicated. It is a little, oh, there was a question about authorized official signature. My understanding that does have to be HR CUNY campus on your campus. We don't, our HR at the CUNY Central gives guidance, but our campus HRs are semi-autonomous and report to their presidents. And now this part, again, I may need some help from Carolina or Megan. This has been updated, this particular form. There's some old forms floating around that tell you to send it to a different place, but you mail to U.S. Department of Education, MOHELA, or upload electronically to MOHELA if they're already your servicer. But it's a possible, like you're like me, I'm in Advantage. And so that will be a little more complicated. But from what I understand, once I file the form, that will put me into MOHELA. And so what I may do is actually apply for another entity for myself, where when I was full-time at St. Peter's University, file that, and that will bring me into MOHELA. But I didn't quite understand, and again, maybe Carolina or Megan can chip in or put in chat, what you do if you're, if mailing by, oh, but we have, sorry, there's a fax option. So, and I think the recommendation is to do both hard mail and fax.
Yes,
So,
I would do both. Yep.
yeah, now I am a little concerned that when we get close to October 31st, what the capacity of that fax number is. But if it's an electronic fax number, which I hope, it should have the capacity to do high volume. So this form isn't that complicated, but on the other hand, in our previous discussions for CUNY Central, we didn't really get much guidance because they haven't been processing these. They've been turning them down because they've been taking contact hours as if that's what we only teach. So we'll find out, but there has been some promising movements at CUNY Central. I just got an email from them today, and I'll put some links up in the chat about that. So they had absolutely nothing up on CUNY benefits or HR about this program or the form, but now they have put the form up under CUNY benefits. They have a drop-down menu, and they have a link to EdCap, where you can do webinars, which is Carolina Rodriguez's group, which is also, she's also with Community Services Society, who's doing that program with Robin Hood. So we have another entity called PSLF.NYC that we have vetted. And of course, AFT and NISA. If you're going to any other group, like Megan said, you really better check them out, especially if they're charging money. But we have not vetted other groups. Bring them to us and we will see. But I think you should stick to these. So we have a very good website done by Fran Clark and our web team, communication teams at PSC. We put up as much information as we can that's helpful. If you have anything to add to that, let us know. The other thing I'm going to put up in chat, again, I think it has to do with some of our union nudging of CUNY Central. They are doing a webinar on Thursday at 10 a.m. I would suggest you to register for that. I'll put it in. We don't know, they are working with EdCap, which we highly respect. So I expect it to be good, but hopefully I'm still getting a lot of non-comment answers to my questions to CUNY Central. So I'm hoping by then they will be a little more, have a little more certainty on their guidance on how for us to get this through campus HR effectively. And I see a lot of questions in chat and Q&A, and we'll probably have trouble doing all of these. So I think I want to break away and just do questions live that have to do with employment verification. And then after that, we can do the more general ones, which of course we're asking you to pivot to go to the NICET webinar or go to the recorded EdCap webinars that are all linked in our webpage.
Paul, if I could just chime in real quickly, I see this
Sure.
question a couple times. So if folks need to verify other employment besides their employment for CUNY, they are going to need a separate form. Each employer, if they're trying to stack work time to get to the 10 years, they're going to need to get a verification from each employer. Now, some folks might have worked for, a very small nonprofit or something that has since folded. In that case, there is a spot on the form to indicate that you cannot verify employment because the employer no longer exists. And that's something that it shouldn't bar you from counting that time, but you're probably going to have to give a bit of a narrative for that. So just so you know, you will need a separate form for each employer you're going to be using to get to your 10 years of employment.
And we've been getting a lot of questions of what do we do if we don't get our form back in time? And if you have a public service elsewhere, that may be a way that you lock in your timestamp if that becomes a problem. I'm going to put in right now, this is new, and I think from our nudging, this is from CUNY administration benefits, and they do now have a section on PSLF, which they did not have in the past. So Carlina, do you want to chip in here? I raised some questions without answers.
Yes, and hopefully I can, there's so many questions, and I'm going to start off by saying the questions are really good questions, and the biggest ones that I'm worried about, and out of full disclosure, I am not with CUNY, I don't work for CUNY, and even the people that work at CUNY don't have right this moment the answer to a lot of the questions that are very specific. So a lot of the questions are coming in as I work X number, or I taught X number of courses, units, credits, do office hours count, and you really are asking the right questions. We don't have specific answers to you other than we can share what the bill says, and that is for every in-class credit, you get to multiply it by 3.35. The idea was that would account in a sense for office hours. Now, Paul, one thing that may be useful is for us to grab all the questions after the fact once you have the transcript, and let's put them together, and let's make sure that we share them with CUNY for them to help us provide additional guidance. Now, the governor is expected to sign the bill on Thursday. So anything that I'm talking about, the bill, it's not official. It's going to be official, fingers crossed, by Thursday, and then hopefully we will get additional guidance. Now, for you to be aware, for public service loan forgiveness, you're either deemed a full-time employee or you average 30 hours per week in order to get qualifying credit towards 120 months of payments while you work full-time, right? What the bill does for adjuncts is that it says that if you average 30 hours per week and after using the multiplier, you can then check off the box that you're full-time, right? So once you average 30 hours per week, you can go ahead and check off the box that is full-time. You don't have to be thinking about the exact hours, right? Now, just for you to know, the federal government is going to take that form at face value. They're not going to go back to your school and say, show me the time card X, Y, and Z. Much less because we now will have a New York State bill that allows CUNY to do that. So I am just putting it out there that they're going to take the form at face value. So again, if with the multiplier, you reach the 30 hours at that point, you should be able to check off. Again, full disclosure, I am not CUNY and I am just giving you my interpretation of the bill. And as far as I know, and I know I've been working with the bill and the people behind it a little bit. So that's my interpretation. Now, I know everyone is eager to submit everything. The other thing that got asked is like, okay, I consolidated, or should I wait for the consolidation to go through before I submit the form? No, you can actually submit the form. You can fax and mail it. The submission instructions are in section 7 of the form. I can put in the chat the PDF form in there. You don't have to wait. The form will eventually go to Mohila. There are only 2 ways to get to Mohila. You either consolidate and select Mohila as your servicer, or you submit the form. And let's say you're with Advantage Nelnet. Once Mohila gets that form, they're going to recall your loans from that other servicer to them, because Mohila is now the only servicer managing the PSLF program. Now, do you go ahead and consolidate? Well, there are 2 situations. There are people that must consolidate because they have older FELP or Perkins loans that in order to be eligible, not only for PSLF, but also for cancellation, which we're not even talking about today, you would need to consolidate FELP and Perkins loans and make them into direct loans in order for the federal government to forgive them under PSLF or cancel them under the latest news. Now, when might you want to consolidate? There's only one extra tip I have for that, and that is if you went to undergrad and then worked for a qualifying employer and then went to grad school, PSLF and the payment count applies per loan. So let's say you went to undergrad, you worked for 2 years, and then you went to grad school. If you submit your employment certification forms only from October 1st, 2007 up until now are going to count, or moving forward, you may have 2 years of qualifying payments for your undergrad loans, but those are not going to apply to your grad loans unless you consolidate them up. The rule is that if you consolidate prior to the deadline, and you want to be careful, only up until October 31st, if you submit a consolidation, they'll give you the highest credit payment count applied to the whole thing, right? So in the undergrad grad example, you would be able to apply the 2 years from the undergrad to the grad if you consolidated. Right now, I want to say you're kind of in a safe zone to consolidate up until the deadline. After the deadline, if you consolidate, you're going to restart the payment count. We don't want to do that. You're going to restart the payment count. Another great question that I got was like, I am not in an income-driven repayment plan. Do I need to be in an income-driven repayment plan? After October 2022, you must be in an income-driven repayment plan in order to accumulate those qualifying payments. PSLF as a program does not end in October. PSLF reverts back to the original rules, which say you must be working full-time for a qualifying employer, making payments under an income-driven repayment plan on time and in full, right? Like those are the original, and have direct loans. The have direct loans is still the rule. So again, to answer a lot of the questions about like the multiplier and all that, I can put the language of the bill that basically says that it's per credit, Todd. It doesn't go into all these other variations about office hours held and all that. I think those are still very valid questions, and we should gather them to see if there's any leeway. Like if I'm you, I'm advocating for the most leeway to count those as multipliers. Because I can already see some people being at like 26 hours or 29 hours, and that would be devastating. If for 1 hour you cannot get this. So please, I hope that helps answer. Let me see here. I think those were the notes that I had. Megan, I don't know if you want to tackle more questions from what you're saying. I know that there's like a lot of questions that are very specific.
Yep. I'm gonna punt, and this is why I'm always nervous about giving really detailed advice based on these situations, because there's usually missing information and people don't realize it. I really encourage folks, and I'm gonna put it again in the chat. Go to NYSET resources. If you've got a complicated loan situation, multiple loans, breaks in employment, things like that, do a webinar. just sign up for an individual counseling session now, because you're probably not going to get as full an answer as you need from certainly me, and Carolina is better at this than me, but I would say that probably, sitting down with your paperwork in front of you with someone is really the way to go for this, especially as we're getting so close to the deadline. I would also add that, we're kind of waiting, right, for the governor to sign the bill. While you are waiting, if you're not sure, and oftentimes people are not, go find out what types of loans you have. Go to studentaid.gov if you're not sure. People think, well, I have an unsubsidized loan. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. Go and find out the type of loans, who your servicer is, get that information ready. If you need to consolidate your loans, begin the loan consolidation process. The CUNY verification is, Paul has been doing so much work on this to try and get answers. I see the back and forth between him and CUNY HR, but that's only one piece of this. So make sure that as you're waiting for this, you're doing the other pieces too. Sorry if that's a little bit vague, but that's kind of, as I'm looking at these very specific questions with different types of loans, Perkins loans, consolidated Stafford loans. We should, Carolina, do you want to touch on just kind of clarifying when we're talking about student loans, we're talking about federal loans only, not private loans.
So,
If people, go ahead, Carolina, take it away.
sorry. So the way to confirm your loans and those that may be eligible is by going to studentaid.gov. That is the national database for the federal government. So if you see loans there, right now you could do something about them to make them eligible for PSLF, which is make sure that they are direct loans. I'll put in the chat a one-pager that has a link to a 3-minute video at the end. You will hear my voice that walks you through studentaid.gov to verify those loans. This does not apply to private loans. So you cannot bring back private loans into the federal system, and those are not going to be forgiven under PSLF or other type of relief under the federal government. So this only applies to federal loans. Again, if you have the older loans, which I refer to older loans like FFELP loans. So for example, if your loans were not benefiting from the COVID forbearance, that's a red flag. Chances are those are loans that would need to be consolidated into a direct loan to make them eligible for PSLF. So that's a great point. And again, I'll put, I think I already put it in, but I'll put it again. Now there was a question about, do you get each certification form for each college? And unfortunately, that is my understanding. CUNY doesn't have a central place where you can just submit the form and they're going to fill it out. Now, maybe in a year, in a few months, they may generate or be incentivized to create that system, because they will be required to provide this form under the current bill, which is another benefit of the bill. They will be required to provide that upon employment departure if you already requested it. Now, whether they continue to do it by college and make each college or entity responsible for it to be determined, right? Or whether they opt for a centralized system to be determined. Not gonna dive much deeper into that.
Yeah, and I agree with that assessment. They are considering developing an electronic system to interface with DOE, but DOE isn't quite ready for it yet. It's a huge process for CUNY to do anything to centralize. And because right now their HR is decentralized. So as you may have found out, if you want your health benefits, they are not aware that you're teaching in multiple places. So you need a separate form, but not only for different campuses, if your hours have changed from one year to the next. So if you're combining 2 campuses in 1 year and the next year you're only at 1 campus, you'll need separate forms for those. And they're aware of that.
And the one thing that someone asked, that it's a really good point. Now, the bill that we're talking about only applies to institutions in New York State. So if you, let's say, teach a course in New Jersey, you would have to fill out a form, and it would be based on their guidelines, right? However they consider your hours. So that's kind of like an extra hurdle for those people that might be teaching across in another state and might have different work period. Now, As long as they are a public or nonprofit, those would count. I've had people come to me that work at for-profit colleges, and unfortunately, you can run the EIN number, but chances are those are not going to qualify.
Yep.
Again, once you average the 30 hours, you should be able to mark and check off that box as full-time. And I would venture to say, if you've had that status for like the 8 months, 2 semesters, I will just say again, ED is going to take that as face value. You can put your employment dates there. If you average the 30 hours both, check off the full-time. Again, don't quote me on any of this. I am not HR. I'm just saying that I would push a little there to hopefully benefit.
Carolina, really quickly, I just saw this coming up. Well, Paul kind of answered, but I just want to emphasize, CUNY, also if you teach at SUNY, our State University of New York system, that is a part of this. Again, any private sector, not-for-profit college, people sometimes get religious colleges a little confused. Most religious colleges are not-for-profit, although not all. So do check. Again, there's that small subset of for-profit colleges, and they are not covered by the bill.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's an awful lot of questions, and I think we will have, because you pre-registered, we have your email addresses. So we will try to consolidate all these questions and send something out for answers to everyone that came. But like Megan said, with a little caution, it's like talking to an attorney. We may not know the correct answer to something, especially when it comes to applying for adjuncts, because it hasn't happened before. It won't start happening till the 15th. When the ink is dry, that law is active, and then we'll start getting experience. And that's one reason we're probably not getting as much guidance as we'd like from CUNY at this point, CUNY Central. But your questions are essential, and there will be that webinar at 10 a.m. On Thursday. We all did this on purpose. We scheduled this, originally we were going to schedule it the day after. We thought it was going to be September 7th. But I think we really think it's going to happen this time. So we're just going to have to do our best. I remember a question that somebody had emailed me was, it was somebody that if she consolidates, because of her income, her payments would get really large. And she was concerned about that and the risk involved in that. And that's an example where I said, you'll have to talk to a counselor, because you're going to have to weigh that. Now, if you don't make a lot of money, now this person, most adjuncts are not going to have an income problem. I think you can generally, when you consolidate, you can choose an income-based repayment plan. And I think the advice is to go as low as possible payments per month if you expect it to get forgiven in a few years. Why would you want to pay off the loan before you could get forgiven? So I think that's what I'd heard from Protect Borrowers, if you could correct me on that.
So if there are any specific issues when you're like, one, if you're confused about the consolidation and you need help, like use the resources that we've provided. You can always reach out to EdCap and we can help you out. There will be people whose income is higher, and it might not come from them, it might come from a spouse, and then the income-driven repayment plan may be prohibited. I say submit the forms, meet the deadline, and then we'll meet you on the other end once you get feedback, and we can sit down and strategize and determine with you whether PSLF is worth finishing. PSLF doesn't go away. It's a question of, do you want to do the 120 qualifying payments? Is it worth it for you? And in some cases, it might not be worth it for some people, but I say, given the deadline, given everything that is happening, you want to position yourself the best possible way, and that is just submit the forms, make sure you have the right type of loan, submit the forms. And if there's an issue, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to fix it. And if PSLF doesn't end up being the right thing for you, you will find out. But the last thing you want to do is miss the deadline and then not realize that it might have been good for you.
Carolina, really well said. I would just say, apply. Like, you might get rejected for other reasons, but it's a silly reason to get rejected because you missed a deadline. So it doesn't hurt to try.
And to Raj's last comment, Nanda, you get a counselor by going to the NICET website or EdCap, and you sign up for a one-on-one. Do it sooner than later. I can't imagine they can keep up with the demand. Just like you heard, the NICET webinar is already subscribed to its limit. So sign up for stuff.
The one on the
away.
15th is, but we've got 4 more scheduled. So those are still open for folks.
Oh, so the other thing is, you know, we really are worried that we do know some HR campuses are better than others. And this has been acknowledged by many people. So some, you may get really good response. You don't have to have all your employment forms in. All you need is from what I understand, correct me, Carolina, Megan, as long as you have one form in, you're time stamped. Now the loans do have to be, the consolidation process has to be in the works before the deadline. Isn't that correct, Carolina, to qualify for all those payments and all the
Yeah, so
waivers?
I would say that if you want retroactive credit, you do have to submit the form, the PSLF form. If you don't need retroactive credit, now I'm about to confuse everyone. So the takeaway is submit the forms on time. It's not just one, you want to submit them all up until now, just to be on the safe side. For example, if I consolidated today because I had FFELP loans, they would need to retroactively give me credit from like yesterday moving back. And so they would need to have that form in order to give me that credit. For people who have had direct loans, I'm less concerned about meeting the form deadline, but anyone else, that's why my takeaway is just submit the forms, all of them prior to the deadline to get in and avoid any issues. We don't want to get to the other side and say, oh, I didn't submit this form, so they don't want to give me a year's worth or 2 years worth. Just submit all the forms that you have. Remember, it's only employment starting from October 1st, 2007, moving forward up until now that you need to get forms. If you worked at CUNY or anywhere else in 2005, well, that's not going to count. And now if you work there and have been full-time, like not a problem, they'll give you your employment start date and end date, or that you're still working there. You don't have to worry about that. But you are looking for every employer you've had since October 1st, 2007, that it's a qualifying employer, that is a nonprofit, 501c3, or a nonprofit that provides other public service and government jobs.
And then from what I understand, Carolina, it's only after you started making your payments that the public service counts, right? Or can you go back and let's say you started making your payments in 2012, but you had worked public service before that? I don't think that counts unless you had another loan that you were paying. Is that correct?
In general, the loans have to be quote unquote in repayment. Now, the only hesitation for me to say, yes, that is correct, is because the government may be willing to give credit for forbearances and some deferments.
Yeah.
So it's possible that people might get more than when they were in repayment. And I should mention that the suspended payments as a result of COVID count towards the 120. Yes. So if you benefited from the COVID forbearance, you could arguably have like over 2 years in your pocket without having to pay any payment, which is really good. And that's why we say just submit the forms, because you never know. And again, the government is going to go back and for some people give them credit for forbearances and some deferments. They're going to do that automatically, and they're going to do that, unfortunately, next year. They're pushing it back. So we say submit the forms, position yourself, because it's going to take a while. So you submit the forms and you're not going to hear back by October at this point, right? Like I'm not being pessimistic. I'm just being realistic with the delays that we're seeing. So it's okay. You're going to submit the forms, and then it may be sometime early next year. Hopefully you hear back, they give you a payment count. And then at that point, you can take a look at your balance, the payment count, and you can make an informed decision of whether finishing up PSLF is worth it for you or not. There's a lot of questions again about the office hours and whether those count. I don't want, I hesitate to give you a link to the bill, but I don't know what others think, the panelists think about. The bill says that you should get credit 3.35 hours work for each hour of lecture or classroom time. So I am not reading an exception for other type of office hours, in part because the logic was that if you do the multiplier, that would account for potential office hours. But I don't know, Megan or anyone else who has also been working on this bill has any other.
I know that there's been discussion on office hours and, for example, also things like labs. So that counts as classroom time generally, yes. I can't answer the office hour question. I mean, obviously, we're pushing for as broad an interpretation as we can. Paul, do you have any more kind of insider information on that?
Well, the multiplier was done on purpose. So even though it's by contact hour, at CUNY, you have 3 contact hours for a 3 credit class generally. Now, that's not always the case. If you have a lab that's 1 or 2 credits, it might be a contact hour of 3. So it's your contact hour. And CUNY has keeping up this fiction that those are the only hours we work, so they don't have to give us other required benefits of full-time employees. And maybe they're banking on us losing our medical benefits in the next union negotiation. Right now, you're compelled, if you work 30 hours a week, to give us medical benefits. You wouldn't need a union contract for it. So there's the political reasons why they've been holding back, not counting our true hours of work. And to me, we need a lawyer and say this nonsense. But so 3.35 times 3 contact hours brings you above 10 hours. And then, so 3 classes, you got the 30. The problem of the law a little bit is not all colleges count contact hours as 3 hours per 3 credit classes. So some may say 2 hours and 45 minutes. They literally talk about the time in the classroom where CUNY just kind of averages up. So in those cases, I'm suggesting you fill it out yourself and you have 3 credit courses. Well, like me, I'm at CUNY and at another university. For the other university, I'm going to fill out the employer section, write 10 hours a week for a 3 credit class. And then if that university says, well, if you do the 3.35 multiplier, you don't get to 10 hours. Well, our understanding is that the discretion is already there in the federal law for any college to say, if you teach a 3 credit course, that's 10 hours of work, whether it's paid as 10 hours or not. What the law does is it compels CUNY and SUNY. It doesn't give them any choice. They have to give you 3.35 for every contact hour. Basically, the legislator overrode our CUNY administration with this bill. So that's why it may not work as well with other colleges. So it's another reason to fill out the employer form yourself and to work with a counselor if you need to.
Paul, one more, if you can answer, I'm just seeing this. What about people who not so much multiple jobs at CUNY, or I'm sorry, not multiple campuses, but multiple jobs? So if someone was an adjunct and they were also a college assistant or, part-time clerical or whatever the case may be, how does that work?
My understanding is you have to file separate forms for every title.
Okay.
And then, and every college, every title, every period, if the periods change, what I suggest is have one cover letter where you say everything and then attach all the forms and then use your judgment. So I see a number of things like, well, what if I do the calculations wrong? Don't do the calculations wrong. Do them right. Do you really want to trust HR? You can, but somebody else mentioned that they got bad advice from Navient. I've heard people are getting bad advice from Ohila, from DOE. They just hired a lot of these people. They're not perfect.
Yeah.
So you really have to rely on your own diligence, not what somebody says over the phone. And you can look at the law. The law, it's not, Harvey Epstein, really good at writing laws. It's very straightforward, it's short, you can read it, there's not much ambiguity. We're talking about the office hour thing. I don't think that was really their intention. So again, I did put in chat a few times, and I'm gonna put it on the PSC website. I just got confirmation today from CUNY Central of what offices to use. We have 2 EINs for CUNY. One is for community colleges. The other one is for senior colleges. So we'll put them up there. The person that said they got rejected by having the wrong address, that was probably a year ago or something like that, or under a previous administration. And that probably isn't happening anymore, but we don't know. But these are the addresses that EIN is registered at, which is a little confusing because you're applying through your campus. But that's just the way it is.
So something also to think about really quickly. I completely understand why people are very concerned about doing the forms correctly, having things rejected, things of that nature. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Carolina, jump in if you think I'm way off base here, but get something in. If they reject you, you can challenge it. You can resubmit, but get something in before the deadline. So I realize that's not far from a perfect answer, but building the plane while it's flying is basically, I think, what Paul is trying to do here, because we're waiting for this legislation to get signed, and the devil is going to be in the details once it is signed and we see how CUNY is going to put in the application.
So agree. Just submit something, we can help you figure it out. There's a really good question about summer and winter courses, and I want to go back and read the bill, and this is like, even I won't do it on the spot because I'm still gonna probably confuse you. So and the reason why I want to go back, and Paul and Megan, I'm thinking about teachers at elementary or high schools where they may have the summer off, and yet if they work for that time period, they're considered full-time for the whole year.
Yes.
I think there's something in the bill there that might help better answer this summer and winter course question, because arguably, and this is where I don't want to get into details, like if you taught the fall and the spring, the question is, could you count the whole year? The short answer, factual, like, it's usually per contracts and you have a set start and end date. So for sure you can count that time. So if you worked in the summer and you average 30 hours per week, you would count that as full-time. Now, I get it. Like in the summer, you're probably just teaching one course, so that might not aggregate to 30 hours. That's why I want to go back and read the bill and get more clarification on those different scenarios, that if you work, quote unquote, full-time with a multiplier or otherwise for the fall and spring, do you get to count the winter months and do you get to count the summer months? And that I don't know. So and again, I'm not from CUNY. I'm gonna get in trouble.
So
but you can blame me.
For full-time academics who are, so for example, in the SUNY system, someone who is full-time academic is considered a 10-month, and they qualify as full-time for PSLF. I'm making a bit of an assumption that CUNY operates similarly, but Paul, you may want to check on that. So if a full-timer is considered 10 months, an academic full-timer is considered 10 months, then an adjunct who is getting to that same employment place with the multiplier bill should be treated the same way, because the bill is getting their hours to the same place.
Also, we don't get paid. We get paid after we finish teaching. And so it's like, you could say that sometimes they talk about when you are paid is when you are employed. So the question has come up before: family leave, health, sickness. As long as you're on the payroll, that time should count. Now, it may be ambiguous on the summer. They probably, so for instance, fortunately, a lot of times our summer classes are 5 weeks. Example, if it's 5 weeks and you're teaching a 3-credit course, I would claim that, I myself would claim that as 30 hours for that 5-week period. A semester is 15 weeks. So realize that these are estimates you're making with the best guidance you have. So I would claim that time that I taught summer session. They can reject it. You know, it can be a separate form, or if it's right after spring semester, you start teaching a 5-week summer course, then I would include that period. You're on the payroll, you're considered an active adjunct during the entire time, you're getting medical benefits. But the question of what Holly just raised, 2 semesters, not 1 full year. One thing is, we haven't done this before. Adjuncts were being excluded completely. So a lot of these questions, could it count 1 year? I think it should. I think we should be able to go, our medical benefits and everything else count, but we don't really know how it's going to work. A lot of these questions, we don't know the answer, and CUNY Central is just saying no comment. We're not getting straight guidance. We're hoping on Thursday, when they see all the questions that they're getting, that they will have to respond. Because I think it's somewhat negligent to just tell people to apply, and then you'll find out. But this gets to the point, again, they have no comment on our question about filling it out or not. I think if you feel you have a reasonable justification, fill it out the way you think it should be, with the dates that you feel it should be. And then if it's just one, they can reject, and I think you can appeal anything that's rejected, right? If they reject it, you refile. Somebody else had a question about HR editing your form. From what I understand, they don't usually do that. My soft information is that if we just filled them out, 3-credit course, 30 hours a week, put that in, they'll just spend 30 seconds on it and sign it. And I think that's what if you say, oh, I'll let them fill it out, I think you'll be on a different pile on the desk, because then they have to go and try to figure it out. But if you have in the cover letter, and they do like the idea of the cover letter. They have told us that at CUNY Central. So you do a cover letter, say, I worked these hours, I did this summer, and I'm counting this as that many hours. Then you have your paper trail, and I think that's the best way to go. So you'd be sending in multiple forms, and you'll still be under the wire with the Biden. I mean, if you're not asking for the full 10 years, you're not ready yet. You're under the wire, and the Biden waivers account to your payments and everything else. But I'll let Carolina and Megan chip in.
I agree with that. And there's people like, oh, well, then I might not have the 30 hours. Should I not submit the form? Up to you, but I recommend you do it, because the only thing you're wasting is your time, which is very precious and valuable. But the reason why I'm saying that is because the federal government is aware of this issue. And what if in the near future they come up with a better solution than New York? I don't know. You might just want to get those forms in to just get the process going, be familiar with it. Unfortunately, we are kind of like the guinea pigs on this, because a lot of states are not doing this. This is like unique to New York. There might be maybe a couple of other states trying to do this. And the bad part is that we have a deadline. So it's just like the perfect combination for a lot happening. But I would say go ahead and submit it. There's a question in the chat, Antonino, about like prior employment. If you stop working and then you came back to work, PSLF counts are cumulative. So you just need to reach 120. You could have worked, stopped working, came back, get credit for your prior work. Again, only credit or employment from October 1st, 2007 moving forward is going to count, but submit your forms. Again, aside from your time, I think it's worth it. Now, to go back to Paul's previous comment about your employer, there could be, and I've seen it, some colleges that are very particular and they want to fill out the whole form, page 2. So if they tell you that that's what they want to do, as long as they do it timely and accurately, you can say, okay, great. There will be some HRs where you really have to be proactive and do the work for them. So I just don't want you to be disappointed if you go in with your beautiful cover letter and they're like, well, I'm gonna have to fill it out all by myself. That's okay, as long as they do it, it should be fine. You can always send in extra blank copies. They should have them, but you can add and attach in case they want to fill it out. Or in the event that you don't remember your dates for whatever reason, that's the perfect time where you can place a little bit of the burden on that. Now, if you're getting down to the wire in October, that's a problem. You might need to be more aggressive and proactive on that.
Yeah,
Caroline, if
remember,
I could just, I'm sorry, really quickly, if I could just jump in, I'm just seeing kind of this train in the chat here. Just one more clarification. I'm sorry if I'm being redundant on this. So the New York State bill applies to particularly obviously only adjunct faculty and in New York State. But if you worked out of state at another education institution as a full-timer, whether it was academic or as professional or other staff, or if you worked out of state in any kind of qualifying not-for-profit organization, that time does count. When we talk about in New York State versus out of New York State, we're only talking about the multiplier for adjunct teaching. So I just wanted to clarify that, because the way I was looking at some of the chats, people were thinking, well, if I worked outside of New York State, none of my employment qualifies, and that's not the case.
This is a federal program, so you could go work anywhere in the US and it will count. The other thing that I want to say out loud is you want to review the forms because mistakes will happen. So if there's missing information, it needs to be completed. The signatures, you have to sign page 1 and date it yourself, and your employer has to sign and date page 2 and fill out completely section form on their own. They need to have their name legible, their title, their contact phone number. In case the form gets rejected, the Department of Education needs to reach out back to the employer and say, hey, your form got rejected, or they need to reach it back out to you. It has to be a wet signature. When I say wet signature, it's like literally your pen written signature. It cannot be electronic signature. I know after COVID, you would think, no. Now, it doesn't have to be the original inked signature. It can be a copy of the signed form. So if you find out that the campus allows you to email the form, the pre-filled form, and they get it back to you electronically in a PDF, that's good enough. That's all you need. And then you can submit it to Mohila for review. Again, wet signature, electronic signatures are not going to count. Paul, there was a question about the cover letter. If you can say again a little bit what is the vision at this point in terms of doing a cover letter to help the campuses with the form completion?
yeah, it's to really help them process it faster and to prevent errors. It's like I teach at more than one department in my college, and the HR continually forgets that, and I lose my medical benefits, so, and then have to go back. So you want to tell them all the information they need so they don't even have to go anywhere. So they just verify a few things. So put down the departments you teach at, how many credits, classes, contact hours for each class, do the math yourself, and say this is over 30 hours for these dates. And then so the cover letter has everything on section 3 already done. And then you fill out section 3. Now somebody had said, well, they taught 2 semesters, but they got rejected by HR because they claimed a year. And that's what we're saying. It's very fuzzy to claim a year. So at this point, I would just say, ask the HR, what are the dates that they think you qualify? But it wasn't clear to me whether you're full-time or not full-time. So non-teaching at CUNY does count. So if you're an NTA, non-teaching adjunct, it counts, but you cannot use the multiplier for that. You get paid for the actual hours work as an NTA. Same if you work, I used to work as a research associate. Oh, there was a question on that. If you work for RF, Research Foundation, I used to work for RF. And from what I understand, you can combine that because that's qualifying employment. You're not a partisan think tank. You're a university research institution. So as everyone has said, add up all of your public service employment. And if you come up short, just file anyways. We're kind of out of time, so you'll want to put everything in because you don't know how things may go if you refile. Maybe there'll be a new interpretation. We don't know, like for instance, maybe with, who knows, maybe with office hours, they end up doing an interpretation where it would count. So the NTA is for the period you're doing the NTA. The NTA is a certain period. So if you can reach the 30 hours, the problem is NTA on its own, from what I understand, limits you to 25 hours. And they do that on purpose because they don't want you to get benefits. But NTA combined with teaching one course or some other part-time employment you have as a part-time HEO, you can put it all together, but it has to be in that same period, come to 30 hours to be considered full-time. So non-teaching work, if it's paid, it counts. I mean, well, not, we're talking, okay. So Megan, we have this title called non-teaching adjunct, and you're basically paid by the hour. Like I was paid by City College NTA to do training for staff. And so I came in, I worked 10 hours, I got paid for 10 hours. But we've gotten the question over and over again, can I multiply the 10 hours by 3.35? You can't. 10 hours count as 10 hours. But as an adjunct, teaching adjunct, you get the multiplier because we're not being paid for every hour worked.
Okay. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I was thinking non-teaching work is some other employment within the CUNY system.
No, it's a title. It's a big bureaucracy. And I'm not sure how graduate assistants work into this, but I assume a graduate assistants will be very similar to teaching adjuncts. I haven't gotten questions on that, so I assume there's.
So
no.
for graduate assistants, if they are paid a taxed, if they are essentially paid as employees, then that counts. So if it's taxable income, or not enough to be taxed, but still you have taxes taken out, then that time would count.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah.
Same thing with teaching assistants. You're usually paid by the hour. Okay, stipends are,
So what you want to do here, let's step back a little. My advice would be take out a piece of paper or your laptop and start from 2007, October 1st, 2007. Get your tax forms, get your W-2s, figure out if you can find all that information, and literally map out your employment dates with the employer. And if you found your W-2, that's what's gonna count. Remember, the federal government is asking you to confirm your employment by using the EIN number, right? If you had an EIN number for the time that you were doing whatever activity at the campus and you average the 30 hours or you were full-time, you'll get credit. So there's gonna be different roles. You have to have a W-2 and been a paid employee in order to qualify. So regardless of the role you had at any qualifying employer, you want to sit down, start your timeline, October 1st, 2007, employment date to employment date, this employer EIN. I'm going to put in the chat my fabulous one-pager that is not so fabulous, but it should give you this idea that you can literally list all your employment with employment dates. Only W-2 paid employment is going to count. The hour discussion that we were having is really just for adjuncts and the teaching hours. If you have any other job as an admin, if you're working at the bookstore, if you're doing whatever you're doing, it's going to count as traditional hours. how many hours do you get paid, right? So the only question is the adjunct question and the multiplier. And clearly there's tons of questions that we're gonna go back in the chat and figure out if we can develop some answers. And I say we, I'm just here and I'm gonna leave it to Paul and team to draft those answers, hopefully for you, and I'll be happy to help as much. But I'm sure there will be more guidance. I'm hoping there will be more guidance because all of you are just going to be upset if we don't get you some additional more guidance on all your amazing questions that are the right questions to us.
Paul, I actually have a question for you now that I'm thinking of it. So is CUNY Central HR, did they have the same human resources as the research as CUNY Research Foundation? Since that's a very separate
I have
entity.
no idea. I'm kind of mystified what CUNY HR does.
I'm sure you're not the only
they
one.
say, well, they say the campuses are autonomous HRs and
Right.
they report to their presidents. And they said that their offices are guidance from CUNY Central. So
Okay.
it's a decentralized system. Now, I'm not sure how RF works, even though I worked for a research institute for 10 years, but it was prior to 2007, as I can count. I thought it was fairly straightforward. I got paid by the hour. Now, the thing I put on chat is when I got stipends from the Teaching Learning Center, when I did the paperwork, it said, 50 NTAs at your NTA rate. So you may feel like you're getting paid a lump sum, and that's how it shows up. You get a check and it was from your stipend, but it was often calculated from NTA rate. That's the way it's done at John Jay. There may be stipends that are different, but I suspect that that's fairly uniform. I got paid as an NTA when I was in the CUNY Research Fund because they used some hard money mixing with soft money. So yeah, think about all the work that you've done.
Paul,
yeah,
Paul, I'm just thinking from a process point of view. Does the Research Foundation have the same human resources department as the CUNY campuses? Is it all centralized, or because I know they're considered separate entities, so would they need to go? So folks who are trying to use some of their Research Foundation time to get their 10 years, would they need to submit a form someplace else, I guess is my question.
Yeah, my impression is they'd have to file with RF HR.
Okay. All right.
We haven't gotten much information on RF, and hopefully that's good news. They may know exactly what to do, so they haven't been pestering us. So I'm kind of being reactive to the questions I've been getting for the last few weeks. But I don't know, there's only a few people that the NTA will bring them over up to the 30 hours, I think, because they usually, a lot of times they're equivalent to one class. So then you would do accordingly. So in other words, it's not uncommon that they'll pay you $5,500 NTA, which is equivalent to the same amount you get for a course. So it's probably comes out to 10 hours a week. But I would say whoever you got the stipend from, ask them, and then put it in your cover letter and say, I would stipended is the way they talk about it at that semester, and I got paid such and such. You can look up your rate. If you go to the employee HR, it will show you your adjunct rate. That's the same as your NTA rate, I think. But we're all kind of guessing, so realize that this is not legal advice. This has not been implemented before, so we don't know how the different HR campuses are going to implement until they start doing. No, oh yeah. So we had talked about doing a PSA CUNY template cover letter. We haven't done it. I keep asking questions to HR to try to get enough information, and I haven't gotten any substantial. I'll have to sort things out. So it was going to have to be a very outlined template. It won't be anything more than we already said verbally. Put your employment ID in, put all the information you need, hours worked, dates, everything you need for section 3 and how you got there should be in your cover letter. So it's easy for the campus HR to review. Put yourself in the shoes of being in campus HR and wanting to look at the form, see your cover letter, and be able to process it quickly.
Someone put in the chat or in the Q&A, the CUNY first has your employment history. And does anyone know what type or what level of detail does CUNY first have? Does it have like your employment dates, hours? The reason why I'm asking is because if you're getting close to the deadline, meaning it's like October 29th and you're not getting your form, you could complete the PSLF form and right above before your signature on page 1, it says that you were not able to get the form completed. And if that's the case, this is like worst case scenario, you're like struggling to meet the deadline. If your CUNY first employment history is good enough, you could attach that along with any W-2s that you may have and submit the form. This is only if you're like cutting it close to the deadline. We've used that in other situations where they might not find the employer or the employer is not getting back to them or they've closed. Then you can provide to FSA backup documentation about your employment history. They usually want W-2s, but I'm saying like if it's like October 29th, they're not responding to your inquiry. I don't know if CUNY first has what type of level of employment details. But definitely your W-2s, if you're cutting it close to the deadline, you can always submit that form, check off that box, fill out as much as you know on page 2 and get it in. This is only if you're getting to the deadline. Right now, you should do everything to be able to complete the form and have it sign off. So if you notice there, it says, check this box if you cannot obtain certification because the organization is closed or because the organization has refused to certify your employment. I know that they're not refusing, but I'm just saying that if you're getting close, day 28, 29, you could check that box off. They do recommend that you complete section 3, but not section 4, and then provide documentation of your employment. Usually it's going to be your W-2. Again, do not use this method right now. You want to give the campuses a fair shot, but if it's getting close. Anyways, if anyone has any feedback on like what type of record or what the record looks like, someone else is saying the AEMS system might be more useful in this situation. So Paul, maybe there's an additional follow-up with CUNY Central on what is the most reliable employment history data system that they may have. That employees can refer back either to generate the cover letter or worst case scenario when the deadline is looming and the colleges cannot do it on time. Maybe there's like a backup plan.
Yeah, we're going to save this chat because I don't know what an AEMS system. Realize that I'm on the how this all happened to me is I'm on the legislative committee, and I really felt this bill was important. We didn't want people to miss the deadline. So I have done what I could for outreach, putting the pieces together so people can apply. I'm not an expert in any way or form, and none of us have experience with this new bill because it hasn't been implemented yet. But I like Carlina's advice because I put it point blank to CUNY Central. What do we do if we don't hear back from you? And I said, check that box. And what's your opinion on that? And they said, no comment. So, but they didn't say not to do it. But I just said I didn't see any other possible system. So, but I think this idea of putting other documentation together, you know, DOE is going to be overwhelmed, but I want to remind you again, from what I understand is DOE, and those people just got hired, most of them. And Mojio, they're all new. All the old processing places are sunsetting. So they don't really know.
Yeah, so AEMS is Adjunct Employment Management System, and apparently you can look at your schedule, but someone is asking whether that's on CUNY first. So that trigger, like if you as a borrower, as an employee have once you learn a lot today, and meaning we still have a lot of unanswered questions, but if you know of stuff like that, resources, I'm sure feel free to reach out to the folks here to provide some recommendations, because then arguably we can go back to CUNY Central and say, well, what about the system? Or people thought this might be a good idea. I'm going to stop there because Paul, I can talk the whole night, and I'm sure people need to go have dinner and eat. And so I'm going to sip it at this point.
Okay, so this is recorded. Since we purposely had you register, so we have your email. We're going to save the chat. I meant to have the chat settings so you could copy and paste, which should have allowed you to save, but we'll save it, and I'll also try to keep a record of the Q&A. We had more questions than we could handle. Again, go to a NICET webinar, EdCap webinar. In a lot of ways, this was set up on purpose by the Trump administration to be hard to work with. That's why there was a lawsuit. And they did what they could. So I guess we will sign off, but Kim, PSC, please keep this open so we can download, and we can, I can try to copy and paste the Q&A. That takes a little bit of time. Go ahead.
Paul, so thank you. It's been a pleasure. Carolina, you're a wealth of knowledge. I put my email a bunch of times in the chat. One more time, megan.o'brien@nicet.org. Email me for your NICET ID number if you want to do a counseling session or utilize the portal. Like I said, I've gotten some emails already. Everyone will have their IDs by tomorrow morning. So don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. Okay.
And thanks for being here. Carolina, you're in DC now? Carolina was traveling right before our webinar. She really, you know how some people just say, I can't do it? Carolina is not that person.
I'm actually in DC to learn what's after student loan cancellation. So I'm here for a student loan conference. So we'll see if we can start thinking about what's next, with the understanding that we still have a lot of work to do with PSLF and a deadline looming. So there's just tons. So again, take away, just complete the forms, get them in. We'll help you figure it out. Like, I give you my word. Call me at the other end and we'll sit down. We'll figure it out. If there's errors, we'll fix them, but just get them in so we can then have the ability to fight back and say, hey, we need to correct this. If you get them in, we can do something about it. If you don't take the action, then it's going to be hard after the deadline for us to go back and say that you should be allowed to benefit.
Yeah, a very good last message. Get under the wire, submit something before October 31st. So thanks again. And again, there is the CUNY sponsored webinar, which I think they're collaborating with EdCap on. So if they're present, maybe they can answer some of your questions that we could not. So I just canceled my other work so I can just observe that and see how it works. So it seems like a lot, but this is worth it. I mean, you know. So go ahead. So thanks again. I'm the only way I know to save Q&A is to one by one say show all, copy, paste, answer, do the same with open. But I'll do this and we'll try to get back to everyone that's registered.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
And PSC, Kim, please keep this open while I try
Paul,
to.
Yes. You
Yes.
can run a report. You don't have to copy. You can run a report. I got
Okay.
you. Don't worry.
Okay, you're going to run a report then, right?
Yeah, we can run a report for even on last Thursdays also. So we can do both.
Wow, great.
Yeah. Okay.
Great, do that. And I appreciate you standing by. You have tremendous amount of stamina, and it's really horrible how the PSLF program excluded people that work for unions. Isn't that